The warning alarms screamed through the small transport ship as Kim Tae-ho watched his control panel light up with red lights. His hands moved quickly over the controls, but nothing worked anymore. The engine had died completely, and now his ship was falling toward the brown planet below. Tae-ho was only 25 years old, and this was his first solo mission as an engineer. He was supposed to check some mining equipment on 3 different worlds and then return to Earth. Simple job, they told him. Easy money, they said. Now he was going to crash on a planet that was supposed to be empty. The ship hit the ground hard and bounced twice before sliding to a stop behind some large rocks. Tae-ho sat in his seat for a moment, breathing heavily. His head hurt and his arm was bleeding, but he was alive. He looked at his air gauge and his heart sank. The crash had damaged his oxygen system and he only had 6 hours of air left. Outside his window, he could see the planet was mostly desert with strange purple rocks scattered everywhere. The sky was orange and there were 2 small suns in the distance. According to his maps, this planet called Kepler 442b had been surveyed years ago and marked as uninhabited. No life forms detected, the report said. Tae-ho put on his emergency suit and stepped outside. The air was thin and he could taste metal in his mouth even through his breathing mask. He walked around his ship and saw that the engine was completely destroyed. Black smoke was still coming from the wreckage. There was no way he could fix this alone. He activated his emergency beacon and sent a distress signal, but he knew it would take weeks for any human ship to reach this far out. His oxygen would be gone long before help arrived. He sat down on a rock and tried not to panic. Think, he told himself. Engineers solve problems. As he was checking his supplies, he heard a strange sound like clicking mixed with humming. He looked up and saw something moving behind the purple rocks. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then he saw them clearly. Creatures about his size walking on 6 legs with hard shells covering their bodies. Their heads looked like insects, but they walked upright and carried tools. The creatures had found him. Tae-ho stood very still as more of them appeared from behind the rocks. There were at least 20 of them now, all clicking and humming at each other. They had large black eyes and their shells were dark green with silver patterns. Some carried what looked like mining equipment, while others had weapons that glowed with blue light. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was larger than the others, with more silver on its shell and what looked like scars across its face. When it spoke, its voice was like wind chimes mixed with static. "Human," it said in broken English. "You not supposed to be here." Tae-ho was amazed. These creatures could speak his language. "I crashed," he said slowly. "My ship is broken. I need help." The large creature, which seemed to be their leader, made more clicking sounds to the others. They all started talking at once in their own language. Some pointed at Tae-ho while others pointed at his ship. The sounds they made were getting louder and more aggressive. "I am Zithka," the leader said. "We are Vector. This planet is secret. You cannot stay." "Please," Tae-ho said. "I only have a few hours of air left. I just need help fixing my oxygen system." Zithka looked at him for a long moment. "Other species always bring trouble. Always tell hegemony where we hide." Tae-ho did not understand what the hegemony was, but he could see the fear in the creature's eyes. "I won't tell anyone," he said. "I just want to go home." Several of the other Vector were clearly upset. They clicked angrily and waved their weapons. One of them, a smaller creature with bright red markings, stepped forward and spoke rapidly to Zithka. Tae-ho could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They wanted to kill him. "Viktar says we should eliminate you now," Zithka explained. "Safer for colony." "Wait," Tae-ho said, raising his hands. "I'm just an engineer. I fix things. Maybe I can help you with something in exchange for helping me." Zithka tilted his head, which seemed to be how the Vector showed curiosity. "What can human engineer do for us?" Before Tae-ho could answer, the ground started shaking. It was gentle at first, but then became violent. The purple rocks around them began to crack and split. In the distance, he could see dust clouds rising from what looked like underground explosions. The Vector were all clicking frantically now. Some of them fell down as the shaking got worse. Zivka was trying to talk into a communication device, but it was crackling with static. Earthquake, Tejo said. The mining operations must have destabilized the rock layers. Mining tunnels collapsing, Zivka said with panic in his voice. Thousands of Vector trapped underground. Tejo looked at his portable scanner. The readings showed massive instability in the rock formations below them. The whole area is going to collapse, he said. You need to evacuate everyone now. Cannot evacuate, Zivka said. Too many tunnels. Too many trapped. City will fall. Without thinking, Tejo grabbed his engineering kit and started running toward where the dust clouds were thickest. Show me your tunnels, he called back. I can help. The Vector looked at each other in confusion. This human was supposed to be their enemy, but he was running toward danger to help them. Zivka made a quick decision and followed him with several other Vector behind. They came to a large opening in the ground where Tejo could see into the Vector city. It was amazing. Thousands of the creatures lived in carved tunnels and chambers that went deep into the planet. But many of the support beams were cracking and entire sections were starting to cave in. I need your strongest metal, Tejo said quickly, and welding equipment if you have it. The Vector brought him strange tools that worked differently than human equipment, but Tejo figured them out quickly. He started designing support structures using his knowledge of engineering and physics. The Vector worked alongside him, following his instructions even though they barely knew him. For hours, they worked as the earthquake continued. Tejo showed them how to redistribute the weight load and reinforce the weak points. His oxygen was getting low, but he ignored the warning beeps from his suit. These people needed his help, and he was not going to let them down. When the shaking finally stopped, Tejo collapsed from exhaustion. His oxygen gauge showed only 30 minutes remaining, but around him the Vector city was still standing. They had saved thousands of lives. Zivka approached him with something that looked like respect in his large black eyes. You risked your life for strangers, he said. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Tejo said simply. The old Vector leader was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. We will help you, human engineer. We will help you go home. 25 years had passed since Kim Tae-ho crash landed on that distant planet. The young engineer was now Admiral Kim Tae-ho, commander of the Human Defense Fleet. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and his face showed the lines of someone who had seen many battles, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had saved the Vector so long. Agateho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the large viewing window. His wife, Dr. Lia Soo-jin, worked at a nearby station studying reports about new alien species they had encountered. She was a brilliant scientist who specialized in understanding how different races thought and lived. Their daughter, Kim Nari, served as the ship's communications officer and had inherited her father's gift for making friends with strangers. The galaxy had changed dramatically since that day. On Kepler 442b, the hegemony had grown stronger and more cruel. They now controlled over half the known galaxy, enslaving entire species and destroying any world that tried to resist their rule. The hegemony ships were massive and powerful, with weapons that could crack planets in half, but humanity had also grown stronger under Taeho's leadership. They had built the largest fleet in human history. More importantly, they had made friends with dozens of alien species. Unlike the hegemony, humans treated other races as equals and partners. This had created a loose alliance of free worlds that stretched across many star systems. The other admirals sometimes questioned Taeho's methods. They thought he was too trusting of aliens, too willing to help species that could not help humans in return. But Taeho remembered the lesson he had learned from the Vector. Sometimes helping others was simply the right thing to do. Late one night, as Taeho was reviewing intelligence reports about hegemony fleet movements, his old emergency beacon suddenly came to life. The device had been sitting on his desk for 25 years. As a reminder of his promise to the Vector, now it was flashing red and making a soft beeping sound. Tae-ho picked up the beacon with shaking hands and activated the communication system. The signal was weak and filled with static, but he could hear a familiar voice through the interference. It was Zivka, now ancient and weak. But still, a live human friend, the old Vector said through the crackling transmission, we are in great danger, the hegemony has found us. They have surrounded our new home. World with their warships, we cannot escape this time. Taeho felt his heart sink. The Vector had been living peacefully on a hidden world for all these years, building their civilization and raising their children. Now the hegemony had found them, and there would be no mercy. Our ships are few and weak, Zithka continued. The hegemony has over 200 vessels, including their largest dreadnought ships. They demand we surrender and become their slaves. If we refuse, they will destroy our world completely. The transmission included coordinates to a star system, deep in contested space far from any human territory. Taeho called his senior officers to an emergency meeting. Commander Park Min-soo, his tactical advisor, looked at the star charts and shook his head. Admiral, this is impossible, he said. The hegemony has their entire 7th Fleet in that sector. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. We would be outnumbered 5-1. Captain Yoon Hae-jin, his intelligence officer, agreed. The hegemony would see any human fleet approaching as an act of war. They have been looking for an excuse to attack Earth. This would give them exactly what they want. Soo-jin looked up from her reports. The political situation is already unstable, she said. If we attack hegemony forces directly, it could trigger a galaxy-wide war that humanity is not ready for. Nari was monitoring communication channels from across the galaxy. The news reports are already talking about hegemony fleet movements, she said. They are positioning ships near all our major colonies. This could be a trap. Taeho listened to all their arguments and knew they were right from a strategic standpoint. Attacking the hegemony fleet would be military suicide. It would put Earth and all human colonies at risk. The logical choice was to ignore the beacon and let the Vector face their fate alone. But Taeho was not just a military commander. He was a man who remembered what it felt like to be alone and desperate. He remembered how the Vector had risked everything to help a stranded human, even though they barely knew him. He remembered the promise he had made 25 years ago. The Vector helped me when I had nothing to offer in return, he said quietly. Now they are asking for help, and I will not abandon them, sir. Commander Park said with respect. Admiral, you are thinking with your heart, not your head. The official fleet cannot be risked on a rescue mission that has almost no chance of success. Taeho was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. Then he smiled, the same smile he had worn as a young engineer. You are absolutely right, Min-soo. The official fleet cannot be risked, but I never said anything about using the official fleet. His officers looked at each other in confusion. Nari was the first to understand what her father was planning. Dad, you cannot mean what I think you meant. Taeho turned to face his family and friends. Over the years we have made many allies across the galaxy, species that owe us favors, captains who trust us, worlds that we have helped in their darkest hours. It is time to call in those debts. Soo-jin stood up from her station. This is incredibly dangerous, Taeho. If you are talking about assembling a volunteer fleet, most of those ships are civilian vessels or retired military equipment. They would not stand a chance against hegemony dreadnoughts. That is a risk I am willing to take, Taeho said, but I will not force anyone to come with me. This will be a volunteer mission only. People who believe that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when the odds are against you. He activated the ship's communication system and sent messages to contacts across the galaxy, former smugglers who had become legitimate traders, retired military officers who missed the excitement of space combat, alien diplomats who remembered human kindness, independent cargo captains who valued freedom above profit. The message was simple: the Vector needed help, and Admiral Kim Taeho was assembling a rescue fleet. Anyone who wanted to join should meet at the coordinates he provided, but he was honest about the risks. This might be a one-way machinery. Watched the responses come in and her eyes grew wide. Dad, you need to see this. The communications board was lighting up with incoming messages. Ship after ship was volunteering for the mission. Captain Song Byung-ho was bringing his entire merchant marine crew. Lieutenant Colonel Bae Sun-woo was coming out of retirement with his old corvette. Even alien species that had never worked together before were committing ships to the cause. Within hours, they had over 300 vessels of all shapes and sizes. It was not just about rescuing the Vector anymore. It had become something much larger, a statement about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. Taeho looked at his family and smiled. The Vector taught me that sometimes strangers become family when you help each other. Now it is time to show the galaxy what that lesson can accomplish. The asteroid base hidden in the outer rim had never seen so many different ships in one place. Captain Song Byun-ho arrived with his cargo fleet painted in bright colors that made them look more like a traveling circus than a military force. Lieutenant Colonel Bei Sun Woo brought his old corvette that had been retired from active duty but still had working weapons more. Ships kept arriving every hour. The crystalline Ashran came in vessels that looked like they were made of living diamond. The aquatic Morth brought bioships that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The energy-based Luxari appeared in craft that glowed with inner light. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood in the command center watching the impossible fleet assemble outside. His daughter Nari was working frantically to coordinate communications between species that had never spoken to each other before. Some used sound waves, others used light patterns, and a few communicated through electromagnetic pulses. Dad, Nari said, looking up from her console. We now have over 300 ships, but most of them are not military vessels. The hegemony fleet has proper warships with heavy armor and planet killer weapons. Tae-ho nodded, but his expression remained calm. I know the odds are against us, but sometimes the impossible becomes possible when people work together for something they believe in. His wife Soo-jin was analyzing the different alien technologies. Each species had brought their own unique advantages. The Ashran ships could phase through solid matter, making them nearly impossible to hit. The Morth vessels could create massive water barriers that absorbed enemy fire. The Luxari ships could overload enemy sensors with blinding light. The problem, Soo-jin said, is that none of these species have ever fought together before. They all have different tactics, different communication methods, different ideas about how space combat should work. Commander Park Min-soo was studying the tactical situation. The hegemony fleet is positioned in a standard blockade formation. Their 3 dreadnoughts are anchoring the defensive line while smaller ships conduct orbital bombardment. We need to break through that blockade to reach the Vector evacuation. Ship's Captain Yoon Hae-jin had been monitoring hegemony communications. They are not expecting any kind of rescue attempt, she said. Their intelligence suggests that no human fleet would be foolish enough to attack such a heavily defended position. That gives us one advantage, Tae-ho said. They will not be prepared for what we are bringing. The volunteer fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Each ship was crewed by people who had chosen to risk everything for strangers they had never met. The human captains shared stories about how the Vector had helped their species. The alien crews talked about times when humans had shown them kindness. Captain Song Byung-ho called a meeting of all the ship commanders in the asteroid base's main hangar. The space was filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, all united by a common cause. My cargo ships are not warships, he said honestly, but they are fast and they can carry a lot of supplies. We can use them to evacuate Vector civilians while the military ships keep the hegemony busy. An Ashran captain, whose name sounded like wind chimes, spoke through a translation device. Our ships can phase through matter. We can attack the hegemony fleet from angles they cannot defend. Against. A Morth commander, whose voice bubbled like water, added, our bioships can create protective barriers around the evacuation vessels. The hegemony weapons will have difficulty penetrating our organic defenses. The Luxari representative communicated through pulses of light that Nari translated. We can blind their sensors and communications, making it harder for them to coordinate their attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Bae Sun-woo stood up and addressed the crowd. I have been fighting the hegemony for 30 years, he said. They are cruel and powerful, but they have one weakness. They cannot understand why anyone would risk their lives for others without expecting payment. The plan that emerged was audacious. Instead of trying to match the hegemony's firepower, they would use coordination and sacrifice. The diverse fleet would split into multiple attack groups, each using their unique abilities to create chaos and confusion. The Ashran ships would phase through the hegemony defensive line and attack their command vessels. The Morth would create protective corridors for the evacuation ships. The Luxari would disrupt enemy communications, while human ships provided tactical coordination. Soo-jin had been working with Alien scientists to link their different technologies together, human computers would process tactical data while alien sensors provided information that human equipment could not detect. The most dangerous part of the mission fell to the human ships. They would have to get close to the hegemony dreadnoughts to coordinate the evacuation. Those massive vessels had enough firepower to destroy entire planets. As the fleet prepared to depart, Taeho walked through the hangar speaking with crews from different species. He thanked each group personally and made sure they understood the risks. Many of them would not survive the battle, but they all seemed at peace with their choice. Young Vector named Veltar had arrived with a small group of crystal ships. These were refugees from the original colony who had been living in human space. They insisted on joining the rescue mission, even though it meant flying directly into danger. You saved our people 25 years ago, Veltar said to Taeho. Now we will help save our people again. The volunteer fleet departed the asteroid base in waves. The first group consisted of fast scout ships that would observe the hegemony formation and report back. The second wave included the main attack force, while the third group was made up of evacuation vessels. They traveled through hyperspace toward the Vector system. Taeho stood on his bridge, surrounded by his family and friends. He thought about the young engineer who had crashed on a distant planet so many years ago that man had made a promise to help people who had helped him. Now an entire fleet was keeping that promise. Henry looked up from her communication console. Dad, I am getting reports from our scout ships. The hegemony fleet is even larger than we thought. They have over 200 vessels, including some ship types we have never seen before. Taeho nodded calmly. Then we will adapt our plan. We always do. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vector system and immediately saw the horror waiting for them. The hegemony ships were arranged in a perfect blockade formation with their massive dreadnoughts anchoring each defensive position. Smaller vessels were conducting orbital bombardment while Vector ships tried desperately to evacuate their people. Time was running out. The Vector colony world was dying and thousands of innocent people were trapped on the surface. Taeho activated the fleet communication system and spoke to all the ships. This is Admiral Kim Taeho to all vessels. Today we fight not for conquest or glory, but for the simple idea that good people should help each other. The Vector helped humanity when we needed it most. Now we return that favor. The impossible mission was about to begin. The volunteer fleet dropped out of hyperspace to witness a scene of absolute horror. The hegemony dreadnoughts were pounding the surface of Vector Prime with massive energy beams that carved deep scars into the planet. Vector evacuation ships were falling from the sky like burning stars as hegemony fighters hunted them down. Admiral Kim Taeho gripped the railing of his bridge as he watched the destruction. His daughter Nari was frantically trying to establish communication with the Vector survivors while his wife Soo-jin analyzed the enemy formation. Dad, Nari said with tears in her eyes, the hegemony has already destroyed 3 of their major cities. Zithka is still alive, but barely. They estimate they have maybe 6 hours before the planet becomes uninhabitable. Commander Park Min-soo was studying the tactical display. The hegemony fleet is arranged in a perfect killing field, he said. Their dreadnoughts are positioned to provide overlapping fire coverage while their cruisers hunt down any evacuation ships that try to escape. This is exactly what we expected, Taeho said calmly. Signal all ships to begin attack formation Alpha. The Eshrang ships will phase through their outer perimeter while the Morth create protective barriers for our evacuation vessels. The battle began with a move that no military academy had ever taught the crystalline. Ashran ships simply disappeared from normal space and reappeared behind the hegemony formation. Their phase shift technology allowed them to attack from impossible angles. The hegemony cruisers found themselves taking fire from directions they could not even see at the same time. The aquatic Morth bioships began creating massive water barriers in space. The organic walls absorbed hegemony energy weapons and provided cover for the smaller evacuation vessels. Captain Song Byung-ho led his merchant fleet through these protective corridors, heading directly for the planet's surface. The Luxari ships unleashed brilliant flashes of light that overloaded hegemony sensors and communications. The enemy fleet suddenly found themselves fighting blind, unable to coordinate their attacks effectively. But the hegemony was not defenseless. Their dreadnoughts began targeting the largest ships in the volunteer fleet with weapons that could crack moons. The first casualties came quickly as several alien vessels were destroyed by the massive energy beams. Lieutenant Colonel Bei Sunwo led a group of human fighters in a desperate attack on the nearest dreadnought. His old corvette was badly damaged, but he managed to disable one of the giant ship's main weapons before having to retreat. The battle was chaos, ships from dozens of different species all fighting together. For the first time, the human vessels served as coordination points, using their advanced computers to process tactical data and relay orders to the alien ships. Neri established communication with the Vector ground forces and began coordinating the evacuation. She guided Captain Song's cargo ships to the locations where the most civilians were trapped. Her voice remained calm even as explosions lit up the space around them. Nari called to Sujin, "I need you to analyze the hegemony formation. There has to be a weakness we can exploit." Sujin studied the enemy positions for several minutes before her eyes widened. "The dreadnoughts are positioned to cover each other," she said, "but if we could disable their communications, they would not be able to coordinate their defensive fire." A young Vector named Veltar piloted one of the crystal ships that had joined the rescue mission. He and his crew had been living in human space since the original colony evacuation. Now they were fighting to save their own people. Veltar contacted Taeho directly. "Human Admiral," he said, "we know the hegemony communication frequencies. Our crystal technology can disrupt their signals, but we need to get very close to their command ship. That is suicide." Taeho replied, "Their flagship has more weapons than our entire fleet." "Not if we time it right," Veltar said. "The Ashran ships can phase us through their defensive perimeter. We can disable their communications and escape before they can target us." It was an incredibly dangerous plan, but it might be their only chance. Taeho gave the order and watched as Veltar's crystal ship disappeared into phase space along with several Ashran vessels. The attack on the hegemony flagship was brief but devastating. The Vector crystal technology sent electromagnetic pulses through the massive ship's communication systems. The hegemony fleet suddenly found themselves unable to coordinate their attacks without central command. The dreadnoughts began firing independently. This created gaps in their defensive coverage that the volunteer fleet immediately exploited. Captain Song's cargo ships poured through these gaps, heading for the planet's surface, but the plan came at a terrible cost. Veltar's ship was badly damaged in the attack and could not phase back to safety. The young Vector pilot found himself trapped in normal space, surrounded by angry hegemony fighters. Without hesitation, Captain Song Byung-ho changed course and flew his massive cargo ship directly at the enemy fighters. He knew his vessel was too slow to escape, but he could buy time for Veltar to reach safety. Song's ship took hit after hit from hegemony weapons, but he kept flying toward the enemy. The cargo hold was full of Vector civilians he had rescued from the planet's surface. He could have tried to escape, but that would have left Veltar to die in the end. Song made the ultimate sacrifice. He rammed his damaged ship into the nearest hegemony cruiser. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but it created a gap in the enemy formation that allowed dozens of other ships to escape. The battle raged for hours as the volunteer fleet fought with desperate courage against impossible odds. Ships were lost on both sides, but slowly the evacuation began to succeed. The Morth bioships expanded their protective barriers while Ashran vessels phased in and out of existence to strike at enemy weak points. Neri coordinated the rescue efforts with precision that amazed even her father. She guided evacuation ships to hidden bunkers where Vector families were sheltering. She warned them about hegemony patrol routes and helped them avoid the worst of the fighting. As the last of the evacuation ships lifted off from the planet's surface, the volunteer fleet began their fighting withdrawal. The hegemony dreadnoughts were still dangerous, but their coordination was broken. Their commander was screaming orders that half his fleet could not even hear. The final phase of the battle was the most dangerous. The volunteer fleet had to protect the slow-moving evacuation ships as they tried to reach the hyperspace jump point. The hegemony cruisers pursued them relentlessly, firing everything they had. Dr. Sujin worked frantically to boost the speed of the evacuation ships while Commander Park coordinated the rear guard action. The human fighters used every trick they knew to keep the enemy busy while the civilians escaped when the last evacuation ship jumped to hyperspace. The volunteer fleet followed them into the safety of hyperspace. The battle for Vector Prime was over. They had saved over 90% of the Vector population, including the ancient Zivka, who personally thanked Teho for keeping his promise. But victory had come at a terrible price. Nearly a third of the volunteer fleet had been lost, and hundreds of brave souls had given their lives for people they had never met. As the survivors gathered at a safe star system, Teho stood before them and spoke words that would be remembered across the galaxy. Tade, we proved that the bonds between good people are stronger than the weapons of tyrants. We came here as strangers from many worlds, but we leave as family. The hegemony may have more ships and bigger weapons, but they will never understand what we have learned. The old Vector leader Zivka approached Teho with tears in his ancient eyes. You have honored your promise, human friend, he said. Now the galaxy will see what happens when free people stand together. But even as they celebrated their victory, Teho knew this was just the beginning. The hegemony would not forget this defeat, and their revenge would be terrible. The real war was about to begin. The memorial service was held in the depths of space, with ships from dozens of different species forming a great circle around a floating monument. Admiral Kim Teho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as representatives from every race that had fought at Vector Prime came together to honor their fallen comrades. Captain Song Byung-ho's name was carved into the crystal monument, along with hundreds of others who had given their lives for strangers. The Ashran sang in harmony that sounded like wind through crystal caves. The Morth created patterns of bioluminescent light that told the story of the battle. The Luxari pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. This is what the hegemony will never understand. Teho said to his daughter Nari as they watched the ceremony, they think strength comes from fear and obedience, but real strength comes from people choosing to stand together. Nari nodded as she monitored communication channels from across the galaxy. Dad, the news of our victory is spreading everywhere. Species that have been hiding from the hegemony for generations are starting to talk about resistance. Dr. Sujin approached with a worried expression on her face. The political situation is becoming very dangerous, she said. The hegemony leadership is furious about their defeat. They are mobilizing their entire military for a retaliatory strike. Commander Park Min-soo was studying intelligence reports from human space. Our spy networks are reporting massive hegemony fleet movements, he said. They are positioning their dreadnoughts near all major human colonies. This looks like preparation for a full-scale invasion. The rescued Vector had been relocated to a safe world within human space where they were already sharing their advanced crystal technology with their human allies. The crystal ships could boost communication range and provide energy shields that were far superior to anything humanity had developed, but more importantly, the Vector had become living symbols of what the galaxy could be when free peoples worked together. Their story was being told in every cantina and trading post, from the core worlds to the outer. Rimyoung Veltar, who had survived the battle despite his dangerous mission, had become something of a hero among his people. He spent his time working with human engineers to develop new technologies that combined Vector crystal science with human innovation. The humans saved our people when they had nothing to gain, Veltar said to a gathering of alien diplomats. Now we will help them save the galaxy from tyranny. Ambassador Cho Hai-1 used the story of the Vector rescue to recruit new allies to the growing resistance movement. Species that had been neutral in the conflict between humanity and the hegemony were beginning to choose sides. The hegemony calls us rebels and terrorists, she said at a secret meeting of alien representatives. But we are fighting for the simple idea that every species has the right to exist free from oppression. Captain Yoon Haijin had been tracking hegemony propaganda broadcasts. Their leadership is trying to spin the Vector rescue as an unprovoked attack on their territory, she reported, but the story is too inspiring for their lies to work. Many of their own subject species are beginning to question their rule. The crystal technology provided by the Vector allowed the resistance to establish secure communication networks across the galaxy. For the first time, oppressed species could coordinate their activities without fear of hegemony. Surveillance underground networks began forming on dozens of worlds. Species that had been enslaved for generations started planning rebellions. The Hegemony found themselves facing unrest on multiple fronts as their empire began to crack from within, but the hegemony response was swift and brutal. They destroyed 3 rebellious colonies, completely turning their worlds into lifeless rocks as an example to others. Any species that showed signs of resistance faced immediate and overwhelming retaliation. The galaxy is on the edge of the largest war in recorded history, Sujin said as she analyzed the intelligence reports. The hegemony cannot allow our alliance to survive because it proves that their way of ruling through fear is not the only option. Teho knew that his decision to rescue the Victor had triggered events that would reshape the entire galaxy. The hegemony would never forgive humanity for inspiring rebellion among their subjects. The final confrontation was inevitable. Intelligence reports indicated that the hegemony was assembling the largest invasion fleet in their history. Over 2,000 ships, including their most powerful dreadnoughts, were being positioned for an assault on Earth itself. They want to make an example of us, Taiho said to his senior staff. By destroying Earth, they hope to break the spirit of every species that has joined our alliance. Commander Park looked at the tactical projections. Even with all our new allies, we cannot match their numbers, he said. The hegemony fleet approaching Earth will be 5 times larger than anything we faced at. Victor Preminari was monitoring communications from across the galaxy, but she was also picking up something unexpected. Ships are moving from systems we have never contacted before, she said. Species that we have no diplomatic relations with are asking about the coordinates for Earth. Dr. Sujin examined the data with growing amazement. The story of the Victor rescue has traveled farther than we thought, she said. There are races from the far rim who are saying they want to help defend Earth. The Ashran ambassador arrived with news that would change everything. Our people have been in contact with species you have never heard of, she said. The tale of how humans honored a promise to help the Victor has inspired races across the galaxy. Many are saying they will answer your call for help. The Morth representative brought similar news from the aquatic worlds. Our deep space scouts report that fleets are moving toward Earth from every direction. Species that have been isolated for centuries are coming to join your defense. Even the energy-based Luxari, who rarely involve themselves in physical conflicts, were committing resources to the fight. The humans have shown us what true honor looks like, their spokesman said. Through pulses of light, we will not let them face this darkness alone. As reports came in from across the galaxy, Teho realized that the rescue of the Victor had created something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time in thousands of years, free peoples were uniting against tyranny. The hegemony thinks they are coming to destroy Earth, he said to his family, but they have no idea what they are really going to face. They are about to discover that when you inspire people to be their best selves, the response can be overwhelming. Young Veltar approached with a group of his fellow Victor refugees. We have been working on new crystal technologies that can link different species communication systems together, he said. When the battle comes, every ship in the defense fleet will be able to coordinate perfectly. The galaxy was holding its breath as 2 massive forces prepared for the final confrontation. The hegemony believed that overwhelming force and fear would crush the rebellion before it could spread, but they had forgotten one important truth: sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the size of your weapons, but from the size of your heart and the willingness to stand up for what is right. Defense of Earth would prove which philosophy was stronger. 1 year after the battle for Victor Prime, the largest invasion fleet in galactic history approached the Sol system. The hegemony had assembled over 2,000 warships, including 25 massive dreadnoughts, and their ultimate weapon, the Super Dreadnought Dominator, commanded personally by Supreme Admiral Vexthal. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the approaching enemy fleet on the tactical display. His hair was now completely gray and his face showed the strain of the past year, but his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him to help the Victor so long ago. The official human defense fleet had only 400 ships, and while they were advanced and well-trained, they were vastly outnumbered. Earth's governments had activated emergency evacuation protocols and millions of civilians were being moved to underground shelters. Dad, Nari said from her communication station, we are receiving transmission from the hegemony. Fleet, they are demanding our unconditional surrender. Tell them to wait for our answer. Teho said calmly, we will respond soon. Dr. Sujin was analyzing the enemy formation with growing concern. Their firepower is overwhelming, she said. Even with our new crystal technology and allied ships, we cannot match their numbers. The Dominator alone has more weapons than our entire fleet. Commander Park Min-soo nodded grimly. The hegemony has brought enough firepower to crack Earth's crust. They are not planning to conquer us. They want to make an example that will terrify every species in the galaxy. But even as the tactical situation looked hopeless, something unprecedented was happening at the edge of the solar system. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace in groups of dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The first to arrive were the species that had fought at Vector Prime. The crystalline Ashran came with their phase shift cruisers that could attack from impossible angles. The aquatic Morth brought their massive bioships that pulsed with organic energy. The energy-based Luxari arrived in vessels that seemed to be made of pure light. Young Veltar led a squadron of Vector crystal ships that had been built using the most advanced technology his people had ever developed. These new vessels could create energy shields strong enough to protect entire battle groups. But then ships began arriving from species that humanity had never even contacted before. The insectoid crash brought hive ships that swarmed like living things. The gaseous Nefari came in cloud ships that could change shape at will. The silicon-based Terrans arrived in vessels that looked like flying mountains. Nari watched her communication board light up with incoming messages from across the galaxy. Dad, you need to see this. We now have over 3,000 ships from more than 60 different species. How is this possible? Sujin asked in amazement. We have never even heard of half these races. The answer came from an unexpected source. The ancient Zithka appeared on the main viewing screen, speaking from his ship in the Vector fleet. Human Admiral, he said, the story of your promise has traveled to every corner of the galaxy. Even races that have been isolated for millennia have heard how you honored your word to help strangers. An Ashran captain added through the communication system. The tale of the Vector rescue has become legend among all free peoples. Young species learn it as children, while ancient races remember it as proof that honor still exists. A representative of the Kresh hive mind spoke in a voice like buzzing insects. We have watched the galaxy for centuries, waiting for a sign that cooperation was possible. The humans have shown us that different species can work together without conquest or slavery. The Morth ambassador created patterns of light that Nari translated as we have seen how humans treat their allies as equals rather than subjects. This is the kind of galaxy we want to live in. Even species that had been enemies for generations had put aside their differences to join the defense fleet. The crystalline Ashran were working alongside the energy-based Luxari, despite centuries of territorial disputes. The aquatic Morth were coordinating with the gaseous Nefari, even though their species had fought wars in the past. Supreme Admiral Vexthal of the Hegemony Fleet was becoming increasingly agitated as he watched the massive defense fleet assemble. This is impossible, he said to his officers. These species have been enemies for thousands of years. They cannot work together. His tactical advisor studied the enemy formation with growing concern. Admiral, their fleet is now larger than ours, and they have technologies we have never seen before. Perhaps we should reconsider our Attic. Vexel's eyes burned with rage. We are the hegemony. We rule through strength and fear. A collection of primitive species cannot defeat us. Begin the attack. The final battle for Earth began with the hegemony fleet charging forward in their traditional formation, expecting to overwhelm the defense fleet through sheer firepower. But what they encountered was unlike anything in military history. The Allied fleet fought with a coordination that should have been impossible. The Vector crystal ships provided communication links that allowed instant coordination between all 60 species. The Ashran phased through enemy formations while the Morth created protective barriers for the more vulnerable ships. Human vessels served as tactical coordinators, using their advanced computers to process information from dozens of different sensor types. The Luxari blinded enemy targeting systems while the Kresh swarmed around the larger hegemony ships like angry insects. The battle was chaos on a scale never before seen in galactic history. Ships phased in and out of existence, energy barriers appeared and disappeared, and weapons fired in patterns that followed no known military doctrine, but somehow the impossible coordination worked. The hegemony fleet found themselves fighting an enemy that adapted faster than they could respond. When they targeted the Ashran phase ships, the Morth bio ships would create barriers. When they tried to break through the barriers, the Luxari would blind their sensors. Dr. Sujin watched the battle with amazement. This should not be possible.